She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. We were standing in line at a rooftop event downtown, surrounded by people who knew our names and our titles. She smiled at someone behind me and said she needed a different husband. Not louder than the music, not softer than a joke. Just enough for it to land. I didn't answer. I didn't look at her. I felt my hands go still around the glass I was holding. The conversation around us kept moving, laughter spilling over like nothing had happened. She leaned slightly away from me, already halfway elsewhere. A man stepped into our space like he'd never left it. Ryan. Her ex. I hadn't seen him in years, but he looked exactly the same, like time had passed him by on purpose. He hugged her too long. She didn't pull away. Her body adjusted to him with an ease I hadn't seen in months. I stayed where I was. I didn't interrupt. I watched her laugh in a way she never did at home. Ryan talked with his hands, said something that made her tilt her head the way she used to when she was choosing chaos over sleep. Someone from my office nodded at me, eyes flicking between the three of us. I nodded back. Calm. Neutral. Present. She didn't notice when I stopped standing close enough to be included. She didn't notice when I stepped out of the circle. She didn't notice when I left without saying goodbye. Later that night, she sent a message asking where I'd gone. I read it. I didn't answer. The next morning, she acted like nothing had shifted. She moved through the kitchen barefoot, humming, scrolling on her phone while the coffee brewed. I watched her from the doorway without announcing myself. Her screen lit up again and again. She smiled at it. Not a big smile. The kind that happens when someone feels chosen. She mentioned Ryan's name like it was an afterthought. Said he was back in town for a bit. Said they'd bumped into each other at the event. Her tone was light, almost careless, like she was testing whether I'd react. I didn't. I poured my coffee and left the room. At work, the day moved fast. Meetings stacked. Deadlines pressed. Somewhere between a status call and a logistics review, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark, an old college friend who now worked with a client agency she sometimes consulted for. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. He just forwarded a screenshot of a social post. It was her. The angle was intimate. Too close to be accidental. Ryan's reflection caught in the window behind her. The caption talked about running into old energy and remembering who you were before life got heavy. I didn't respond to Mark. I closed the app and finished my calls. That evening, she came home late. Said traffic was bad. Said she'd stayed out with a client. Her voice was smooth, practiced. She moved closer, reached for me like she always did when she felt a gap forming. I stepped back. Not abruptly, just enough to make her pause. She noticed that. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't check her phone while she slept. I didn't confront her with the screenshot. I let the house stay quiet, the kind of quiet that exposes movement. Over the next few days, patterns started forming on their own. She became careful with her screen, angling it away without realizing she was doing it. Notifications appeared and disappeared too fast. She started dressing differently before leaving, changing shirts twice, applying perfume she hadn't worn in years. At work, I asked our finance lead for a routine overview of shared accounts. Nothing dramatic, just a recalibration. Numbers don't lie, but they also don't accuse. A charge stood out. Then another. Hotels close to downtown. Creative conferences she hadn't mentioned. Rideshares late at night from neighborhoods she never went to. One evening, I stayed late at the office and watched the building across the street empty out floor by floor. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a screenshot. It was a message request from someone I didn't know. Ryan's name was in the bio. I didn't open it. When I got home, she was already asleep on the couch, her phone face down on her chest. A message preview lit the screen briefly before fading. I didn't need to read it. The name was enough. I covered her with a blanket and turned off the light. The next morning, she woke up cheerful, almost relieved. She kissed my cheek like she'd passed a test. I watched her leave the house and realized something had shifted. Not in her. In me. I didn't disappear. I changed my availability. I stopped texting during the day. Not abruptly. Just slower. Replies that used to come instantly started arriving hours later, then sometimes not at all. I stopped asking about her schedule. Stopped adjusting mine around it. When she spoke, I listened without leaning in. She noticed the silence before she understood it. One evening she stood in the doorway of my office at home, watching me work. I didn't look up right away. When I did, she smiled like she used to when she wanted reassurance. I gave her none. I started going to the gym again, not to escape, but to return to a rhythm that didn't include her. I took early meetings, late calls, dinners alone. When she asked if something was wrong, I said everything was fine and went back to what I was doing. She began filling the space louder, talking more, touching more, posting more. Her social media shifted tone, like she was reminding an audience she still existed. Ryan appeared again in the background of those posts, never centered, always nearby. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I didn't check. One night, she came home energized, restless, moving through the house like she needed to be seen. She tried to pull me into a conversation, then into bed, then into an argument. I stayed calm. I stayed distant. That was when she realized I wasn't pulling away to be chased. I was stepping out of reach. Ryan started unraveling without knowing why. It didn't come from me directly. It came from the kind of pressure he didn't know how to handle. A client he depended on backed out. A payment got delayed. A project he'd bragged about online quietly disappeared. Nothing dramatic. Just enough instability to remind him how thin his ground really was. I heard about it through work, not through her. The logistics world is smaller than people think. Names travel. Reputations echo. When someone misses deadlines or overpromises, it surfaces. I didn't add anything. I didn't remove anything. I let the system do what systems do. At home, she became agitated. Her phone calls moved to the balcony. Her laughter faded faster. She started asking questions she'd never asked before. How long I'd be working, when I'd be home, if I was upset about something she'd done. I answered calmly, briefly, without opening doors. She mentioned Ryan less, but thought about him more. I could see it in the way she waited for messages that didn't arrive, in the way her confidence flickered when her phone stayed dark. One evening she came home early and found me already dressed, heading out. She asked where I was going. I told her I had plans. That was it. She stood there, keys in her hand, watching me leave like she was seeing the outline of a future she couldn't step into. That was the first time she realized someone else was losing control. The shift didn't happen in private. It happened where she couldn't control the frame. We were invited to a small industry dinner, the kind with overlapping circles. Clients, partners, a few familiar faces from past campaigns. She arrived dressed like she needed to remind the room who she was. Confident. Polished. A little too sharp. I arrived separately. She noticed immediately. Her eyes searched the room before she smiled at anyone else. I acknowledged her the way you acknowledge a colleague. Calm. Brief. Nothing to hold on to. Ryan wasn't there. Someone asked about him anyway. Not directly. Just a comment about a stalled project, a missed follow-up, a brand that had quietly moved on. The tone wasn't cruel. It was neutral. That was worse. She laughed it off at first, tried to redirect. But the conversation didn't follow her lead. It never does when people stop investing. Later, one of her friends leaned in too close, voice low enough to sound concerned instead of curious. The look on her face changed. Not anger. Recognition. I watched from across the table, engaged in a different conversation, my phone face down. I didn't intervene. I didn't rescue. I didn't explain. By the end of the night, she was quieter. Her posture shifted. She stayed near me without touching, like proximity alone might stabilize things. On the way out, someone I barely knew glanced between us and said they hadn't realized we were so independent lately. It wasn't a question. She didn't speak in the car. She stared out the window, scrolling without reading. That was the night she understood it wasn't a secret anymore. Not because I told anyone, because I stopped covering for her. After that night, she stopped pretending things were normal. She stayed home more, but not in a calm way. It was restless, like she was waiting for something to reattach itself. She lingered in rooms I was in without speaking, moving slowly, creating noise where silence used to be enough. Ryan faded fast. His name disappeared from her phone conversations. The balcony calls stopped. When messages came, they were shorter. When they didn't come, she checked her screen too often, then put it face down like it had betrayed her. She tried reaching for people who used to orbit around her. Brunch plans stalled. Replies came late or not at all. Friends who once amplified her stories suddenly had other priorities. When momentum dies, it does it quietly. I was still there. That was the part that confused her. I cooked. I worked. I slept in the same bed. But I wasn't available in the way she expected. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't fill the space she'd emptied. One evening, she sat across from me at the table, hands folded, eyes searching my face like she was trying to find the version of me that used to explain things. I stayed calm, present, closed. She went to bed early that night. I stayed up, finishing a report, the house completely silent. That was when she realized she was alone without being abandoned, and that the distance between us wasn't created by anger. It was created by access being revoked. She finally tried to confront what I had removed. It happened on an ordinary evening, which was the point. No raised voices. No packed bags. She waited until the house was quiet, until there was nowhere else for her attention to go. She stood in front of me and asked if I was still in this marriage. I didn't rush to answer. I didn't reassure her. I didn't deny anything. I looked at her the way you look at someone who's late to a meeting that already ended. She started talking then, not accusing, explaining, framing things as confusion, as phases, as moments that didn't mean what they looked like. She spoke carefully, like she was rebuilding a bridge with words. I let her finish. When I spoke, it was brief. I told her I was exactly where I chose to be. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I had stopped negotiating for space that should have been automatic. She asked what that meant. Not defensively. Honestly. I stood up, picked up my keys, and said I was going out. No justification. No timeline. No promise of return. She followed me to the door, not touching, just close enough to feel the absence. She asked if there was someone else. I said no and opened the door anyway. That was when it landed. Not that she'd lost me to someone else, but that she had lost access to the man who used to make staying easy, and she had no leverage left to get it back. Her collapse didn't come all at once. It came in missed signals and closed doors. Ryan vanished completely. Not with drama. Just silence. His profiles went quiet. His name stopped appearing anywhere that mattered. Whatever version of freedom he'd represented dissolved the moment it required consistency. Her work followed. A campaign stalled. A client paused. Feedback that used to come wrapped in enthusiasm turned clinical, then distant. She started working longer hours without momentum, staring at screens that didn't reward her attention. At home, she unraveled quietly. She forgot meetings, misplaced things, rewatched old videos late at night with the sound low. She scrolled through photos of trips we took when I was still fully there, stopping on moments she'd barely noticed back then. I was already living differently. Early mornings, focus days, dinners that didn't revolve around her mood. I stopped asking if she'd eaten, stopped checking if she was okay. Not out of spite, out of clarity. She tried to regain control in small ways. Cooking meals I didn't ask for, leaving notes I didn't respond to, wearing the clothes she knew I liked. None of it landed. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the floor of the bedroom, surrounded by old boxes. Photos, notebooks, pieces of a life she'd been trying to outgrow. She looked up at me like she was seeing the cost all at once. I didn't comfort her. I didn't leave either. I walked past, took a shower, and closed the door. That was when she understood the damage wasn't what she'd done. It was what she'd traded away without securing a replacement. She tried one last time when there was nothing left to distract her. It wasn't dramatic. No crying. No speeches. She waited until the house was quiet again, until even the walls felt neutral. She stood near the doorway and said she understood now, that she'd been chasing a version of herself that didn't exist anymore, that she needed a different husband because she hadn't wanted to face who she'd become. She said she wanted me back. I listened without interrupting. I didn't correct her. I didn't argue the timeline. I let the words sit between us like something that had arrived too late to matter on its own. When she finished, the room stayed still. She watched my face closely, searching for warmth, for relief, for any signal she could build hope on. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I told her I had simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. I said I wasn't angry and I wasn't punishing her. I said I had learned how much quieter life gets when you stop overextending yourself. She asked if there was still a chance. I said there could be a future, but not a return. Not to the version of me who explained himself, adjusted endlessly, or stayed accessible out of habit. I told her proximity didn't mean access anymore. That trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, without guarantees. She nodded, swallowing hard, understanding the difference. I picked up my jacket and told her I'd be back later. Not as an escape, as a choice. She stayed where she was, finally still. And for the first time, she knew exactly where she stood. Not abandoned, just no longer in control. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.